Can cultural genocide be stopped? The Al-Nuri Mosque in Mosul is the latest piece of Iraqi ancient history to be blown up. Other archaeological gems in Afghanistan, Mali and Syria have suffered a similar fate. Can the damage be repaired? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. I'm Sohail Rahman. Now, it was the pride of Mosul, which lies in ruins like much of Iraq's ancient history. The nearly 1,000-year-old Al-Nuri Mosque was blown up as Iraqi forces closed in on ISIL fighters holed up in the old city. This is all that's left. The Grand Mosque was destroyed on the holiest night in the month of Ramadan, which has enraged Iraqis and others even more. It met a fate all too common for historical sites in Iraq and other countries in the region plagued by war. So what's being done to stop the cultural destruction? Let's bring in our guests here on Skype. In Turku, Finland, we have Ahmed Zaidan, who's a poet and documentary filmmaker on the Al-Nuri Mosque. In Boston, in the US, we have Michael Danti, academic director of the American Schools of Oriental Research. And in Portsmouth, Ohio, also in the US, Ahmed Zaidan, Associate Professor of Middle East History and Anthropology at Shawnee State University. Ahmed was also former head of the Center for Archaeological Research at the University of Damascus. Gentlemen, welcome to this edition of Inside Story. Ahmed Zaidan, can I begin with you first? Because you are from Mosul. You know the area very well. You know the Nuri Mosque. How much of a cultural loss is this to the people of Iraq and to the global community as well?
I think that the loss cannot be compensated because this mosque is further than it's being a significant religious mosque, because it is the landmark. It is one of the most important landmark in Mosul, and it is the one of the names of cities of Mosul have come from, because cities of Mosul, one of its name, it's Al-Hadba name, the hunchback city. So when today or yesterday, when the mosque has been blown off, many of Facebook users have published that the city of Al-Hadba or the city of the hunchback is no longer the city of hunchback. So it is one of the most significant landmark in Mosul. So it cannot be
It is. Of course, it's also featured on some of the banknotes in Iraq. But tell us, as a resident of Mosul, I mean, you had to leave the country. How central is the mosque to the daily working life of people there? You know, people don't just pray there. It's also was a tourist location for those people that used to come and visit. Give us a sense of, give us some colour about the city and how important that mosque is to the area.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that it is farther than it is being only a religious place. It is it's a place for tourists. Despite that, we didn't have tourists throughout the era that I have lived in Mosul, but as well as many. For example, I have worked in two channels in Mosul, in two TV channels, and I have many times two times I have conducted a documentary about the Mosque of Al-Hadba or the Al-Nuri Mosque. So the people consider it, even the Christians and the other religions. They consider this mosque they consider it as significant, relates to city of Mosul. Okay. It doesn't relate to a religion. It doesn't relate to specific minority or majority. So
okay.
When nobody expected that this mosque is going to be blown
destroyed
off by I couldn't
okay,
imagine
that's fine.
that.
I think you've given us an idea of generally what we expect it to be. Let's bring in Michael Danti here. I mean, much of the cultural loss has been across Iraq and Syria in recent years. In terms of, if we just look at Iraq, for example, how do we gauge the loss to the international community since the time of Saddam Hussein's demise and the upheaval that the country has experienced in the subsequent years?
It was bad before 2014. And then June and July 2014, we saw something really that's been unprecedented since the Second World War in terms of deliberate cultural cleansing, erasures of cultural memory, manipulations of cultural identity. And Daesh has been systematically, deliberately destroying cultural sites across northern Iraq and Syria as acts of propaganda. We call these performative deliberate destructions. They're highly choreographed, and they're aimed at both the local population and further audiences further afield. And with this particular target, they have indeed attacked a site that transcends sectarianism in the city. It really was an important sacred site to all of the residents of Mosul, Mosul being a very diverse city, ethnically and religiously.
Of course, let me bring in Ahmed Zaidan here. Of course, your knowledge is of Syria, and Syria itself has also been hugely affected by the work of ISIL, so to speak. I mean, what's your reaction to what's happened firstly at the Al-Nuri Mosque, and how do you relate it to what's happened in your country?
Right. Look, I think it's important for us to put the Al-Nuri Mosque into its context here and why ISIS would have destroyed this, because I think in reading and following the news, I see a slight difference in the pattern here. Generally speaking, when ISIS commits these cultural heritage atrocities, it's usually either at cultural heritage sites, monuments, obviously, that have great significance to the world, and it's part of a pattern of the ability for ISIS to demonstrate its ability to act with impunity and the impotence of the local population or the international community, for that matter, to respond. And in that context, yes, there's definitely that there too. But the destruction of places of worship, shrines, local like the Nabi Yunus shrine that they blew up, and Shiite places of worship, etc. But the Al-Nuri Mosque is something a little different. First of all, it was built by Nuruddin Zinki. Nuruddin Zinki is credited. He's a Seljuk. It was built in 1172, and he was credited with the person who rejuvenated jihad against the Crusaders. He laid down the foundations that then would be picked up by Salah ad-Din, who was one of his generals, and ultimately lead to the liberation of or recapture of Jerusalem from the Crusaders. So the Al-Nuri Mosque doesn't fit the usual pattern. Furthermore, it's the place where al-Baghdadi delivered his one and only appearance, and he delivered that famous speech. So I think the destruction of the Al-Nuri Mosque here is more a case of essentially ensuring that somehow the unworthy or impure are not allowed to sort of go and follow in their footsteps. Yeah. In addition to the fact that ISIS has claimed that it was a U.S. airstrike, that it wasn't them. So it kind of tells me that there's something a little different here than the usual pattern of behavior that we see, and that they're trying to sort of use this in a different way.
Indeed.
But as Michael said, it's definitely to do with propaganda. But how they're using that propaganda and how they intend to sort of message this out, I think we still have to see that.
Indeed, and we don't really want to go too much into the propaganda or the politics of what might have happened, more so to the loss of that historical legacy across the Middle East, which is hopefully what our discussion is. Let me just give our viewers at home just a little bit more information to what you've just said, because it gives, well, hopefully an idea of how often the destruction of priceless cultural heritage does take place in war zones across the Middle East. Now, these are recent pictures of the ancient Syrian city of Palmyra, which used to be a top tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. ISIL first seized the city in May 2015. Since then, the manager of antiquities in Palmyra has been beheaded and various Roman ruins destroyed. Also, this is the Mosul Museum 2.5 years after ISIL invaded. There again, the group systematically destroyed and looted cultural treasures. The fighters saw it as their mission to erase all traces of history that contravenes their Islamic ideology. They also sold some of those artefacts on the black market. Michael, Danti, let's just come back to you. I mean, during ISIL's time in that area, a whole range of antiquities, which Amir has just mentioned, the tomb of the biblical prophet Jonah, the Mosul Museum, the ancient city of Nimrud, and the ancient library at Mosul, practically burnt to the ground. For our international audience who may not know the significance of the area historically, and certainly the library, what sort of a loss of that is it to the global community in terms of the information and the history of societies long gone?
Absolutely. We refer to ancient Mesopotamia as the heartland of cities. We see the earliest agriculture, the earliest state-level societies, the earliest writing system in the world. And the area of Mosul played a central role in that, in the northern part of Mesopotamia. What ISIL has essentially been erasing, destroying for humanity, is well over 7,000 years of archaeology and history. We have written documents that go back well past 4,000 years from the area of Mosul. The site of Nineveh, the ancient Neo-Assyrian capital city of Nineveh, which features in biblical texts, is on the east bank of the Tigris River, and ISIL has tunneled into it. They've looted that site, and they've destroyed Neo-Assyrian monuments at the site. There were important tourist attractions that were painstakingly reconstructed by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities. When ISIL captured Mosul, they had at their fingertips this vast collection of cultural assets that they could use to finance their operations, but also, again, to promote their radical ideology and essentially try to legitimize themselves as the founder of a new caliphate.
Amir Alzam, I mean, the international community says it always cares from a distance because that's all it can do when these conflicts do actually happen on the ground and cultural history is destroyed. Do they care enough to repair and invest in the future of putting this all together when there's also a greater need generally in these conflicts for food, accommodation, healthcare and education for those that have been displaced?
I think yes. I mean, the international community will eventually come round, and these sites, like Michael was saying, this cultural heritage is as much a world cultural heritage as it is Iraqi or Syrian or Egyptian or whatever. But but the problem is not whether there is a will to recover or rebuild or save. I think the problem is what can you do in the face of such extreme destruction. I mean, the destruction of this mosque for me is an example of senseless nihilism, and it gives you an indication of the type of atrocity that we can now expect in the future. Remember, ISIS is an evolution of its predecessor Al Qaeda, and there's going to be a post-ISIS evolution as well. So, as a world, it's not just for us to sit down and think about how we will repair the damage, but also we should be thinking about strategies to prevent the next catastrophe or to be prepared for the next catastrophe as ISIS then evolves into its next version in years to come. And I think that's where a lot of the work needs to be put in.
Sure.
The kind of strategies that would either prevent, mitigate, or minimize that sort of damage. And I think the world has much work to do on that.
Indeed, I'm sure governments will certainly put their view forward. Ahmed Zaidan in Turku, Finland, the psychological damage to those that live in the area can sometimes be irreparable, especially when you hear the words of residents. And I'm going to quote actually from a report from the New York Times regarding one resident in Mosul who said, "ISIS destroyed everything in my life, the life of my family. There is no longer anything there important to me." It's a difficult journey. It's a difficult journey for those residents who have to now perhaps pick up the pieces if they ever want to return to Mosul and if they ever feel they can rebuild their lives again.
Well,
you're from Mosul, you know those people. Tell us what they might be thinking.
Today, I was sitting with one of my friends from Mosul who is also here in Turku, and we were condolencing each other. We were telling or trying to magnate the sorrow of each other, and we were talking about this incredible or horrible deeds that happened by what's called the Islamic States to our cities. We cannot imagine that once we return to the city of Mosul and we find that the city of Mosul has no Al-Hadba, the city of Mosul has no the Hunchback Tower. This is because we used to see because we relate our city with the Hunchback Tower, and it is because we don't have the skyscrapers, and we don't have a lot of high buildings. So the Hunchback Tower, it is the highest in the town. So
do you think it is important for the Iraqi government in Baghdad to not just offer funds, but allocate funds for the future to have the mosque rebuilt?
I don't think so, because the Iraqi government in Baghdad they are not concentrating on rebuilding the archaeological sites and taking care about the. Okay, let's start from the beginning. The Iraqi government, they are the ones who handed over my city to the ISIS, and so of course they wouldn't rebuild the Hunchback and on the Al-Nuri Mosque or the archaeological site that have been devastated. I am sure that it will be devastated and it will be rubble until a good government or the system is going to be changed. Okay. Then it will rebuild again. But right. But now I don't think so, and we all. As people in Mosul, we don't have any, we don't trust, because they didn't build the bridges until now.
Okay, well, we'll see. People are. I get your point. I'm not trying to interrupt. Do get your point. We have little time to get through all the questions we want to, but understand where you're coming from. Let's just give our viewers a little bit more background to the destruction that isn't exclusively in the Middle East, and it does cost money to try and mend all of these scenarios. In the UNESCO-listed desert city of Timbuktu in Mali, the tombs of Sufi saints were destroyed 5 years ago by fighters from the Ansar Deen group, which is linked to Al-Qaeda. A prosecution reached the International Criminal Court in its first ever trial to focus solely on cultural destruction as a war crime. And over in Afghanistan, Taliban fighters blew up the world's tallest Buddhas in 2001. The Bamiyan Buddhas were built in the 6th century when the region was Buddhist. Experts are debating whether to even restore them. Let's go back to Michael Danti. The 20th and 21st century has seen a great deal of conflict globally. Can anybody really in society put a monetary figure or a monetary tag on what's been lost? And is there an international will or a way to try and fix what has been broken?
There certainly are efforts already ongoing to try to fix, protect, as Amr mentioned earlier, what's been broken, to try to mitigate ongoing damage. One of the biggest challenges that we've faced, we've worked with Amr and the Day After Heritage Protection Initiative in Syria. We're preparing to implement projects in the Mosul area now. One of the biggest challenges we've faced since the outbreak of hostilities, and especially since 2014, has been the presence of radical non-state actors who are deliberately targeting cultural workers and dismantling cultural heritage infrastructure, attacking cultural assets. Where we don't have radical non-state actors such as Islamic State or Jabhat al-Nusra, we can take measures to prevent damage, to repair damage before it progresses, and to work with local stakeholders, and that I can't emphasize that enough, to work with local stakeholders to address their heritage needs. There is a will among Iraqis and Syrians, people throughout the region, to address what's happening to their cultural heritage. It's important to them, and what we need to do in the international community is meet their needs, to help them to save their cultural patrimony.
Amr Al-Zam, in Ohio, is this an attack on the civilized? It is an attack, of course, on the civilized world to a certain extent, but human rights. When you actually attack someone's cultural heritage, it's not a physical attack on a person, but on the infrastructure that the person has been brought up with, lives around, and is part of their social being. Is it as important?
I mean, certainly, it definitely is an attack on the very bedrock and foundation of the glue that holds together a community. I mean, our colleague from Mosul described in great detail his pain at the loss of the hunchback. That's the term given to the leaning minaret of the mosque. And it's very evident in the same way that I felt a great loss and a sorrow and a pain when the Temple of Bel was blown up. You know, this is something for me I have very fond memories of. There's a very special moment when you go to the Temple of Bel in Syria, or when you could go back then, and see the sunrise as the rays get reach that very special window, and then it was designed in such a way so that the light then explodes in there. And this is an image that I saw, but my children will never be able to see. So yes, there is a deep sense of loss, and it's very important for communities. But I just want to go back to two very important points here. One is that when when the international community wants to come back and repair or fix, remember there are a lot of this is it's almost, I mean, you can't rebuild the Temple of Bel. You're never going to be able to rebuild the hunchback or the mosque. You can do reconstruction, but it won't be the same. It won't be the original. And there are very strict rules about how you go about doing this kind of repair and reconstruction and restoration. So the loss is not just simply the loss of what's there now, but also it's a permanent loss. It's not a temporary, oh, we'll put money in it and everything will be right again. And the other thing, which Michael mentioned as well, it's the local stakeholders. It's how invested local communities are in trying to preserve and protect their cultural heritage. And we see this across the region. And these are the local stakeholders that we need to be working with. And the international community has yet to figure out ways in which to really engage with these local stakeholders, who are often also non-state actors. That's very critical for us. And that's where the international community has to focus its efforts.
Well, let's just give our viewers again a little bit more background, because the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict was the first international treaty focused exclusively on the issue. Now, it was written in 1954 and more than 100 countries have signed it, many in the Middle East. Now, they've all agreed to the safeguarding of cultural property situated within their own territory against the foreseeable effects of an armed conflict by taking such measures as they consider appropriate. Michael Danti, can I bring you in here? Because the ICCROM, they're the International Centre for the Study of Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, are a mix and a wide group of international restoration archaeologists and restorers who work in all these countries. A group from Italy have been actually repairing some of the items and statues that were damaged in Palmyra, Syria. Countries do it on a personal, one-to-one basis, and they do what is their area of expertise. In this particular case, it was 3D printing to try and restore these artifacts. It can work, can't it? But it needs more effort globally.
We need more effort, far more effort, because as in the previous question we discussed, the amount of effort that's going to be required. We're looking at entire cityscapes like Aleppo and Mosul, the city of ancient Palmyra, that are going to need to be rehabilitated with local stakeholders, as we've been emphasizing. Many different countries can come in and provide their particular expertises to try to move that work forward, but it's very difficult to estimate at this time the amount of money, time, and resources that it's going to require. But it's not really, to my mind, a matter of whether we should do it. The international community should be assisting. It's obvious that if we don't do that, what we're essentially allowing to happen has been the cultural cleansing of Syria and Iraq. And so we need to see concerted and coordinated efforts, and coordination is extremely important on this, because there is a lack of coordination, but coordinated efforts to try to undo this damage.
Okay. Ahmed Zaidan, we're coming to the end of the programme. I'd like to give you the final word, as you've had time to digest what happened in Mosul in the last 24 hours. If there are the movers and shakers, the thinkers, the politicians that can make a difference to your country in rebuilding its heritage, its historical heritage, what would your appeal to them be?
What happened to our nation is very usual, and it has happened to other nations, and other nations have stood again and rebuilt their towns.
Okay.
So we can rebuild our towns, and we can grip the hope, and we can stand again if only we would have the fertile environment, the fertile ground to rebuild our town.
There we will have to leave it, I'm afraid, Ahmed Zaidan. I think we get a sense, certainly, of your hopes for the future and for your city, which what has happened today, or the last 24 hours, is very sad. Ahmed Zaidan in Turku, Michael Danti in Boston, Amir Al-Zam in Ohio. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you for watching. You can, of course, see the programme again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation, I hope you do, on Twitter. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Sohail Rahman, and the Inside Story team, thanks very much for your time and your company. Bye-bye.